Good evening. I'm Suman Sorg, and welcome back to Washington now. I've been in Washington for 40 years. I came here in 1968. My father was posted to the Embassy of India here, and I've stayed here ever since. And I've thought many times, what has kept me in this city? You know, there was a time, for example, in the crack epidemic of the city in the 1980s, we thought, well, maybe we should move out. The crime is getting really bad. And then one day, somebody, moved into the front porch of the house. We were living on 19th and Calorama Road. And I called the police, and they said, "You have reached 911. Please call back." And I said, now it's time to move out of this city. And when the police did come, they told us, well, get a baseball bat, that might help. But the crime came and went, and what I've really seen over the 40 years that I've been here is a tremendous change. But as an architect, I feel, has there really been enough change? So I started to think about, when I was asked to speak here today, as to what would be maybe a premise for change. So starting from the beginning, what defines a city's architectural vocabulary is its iconic buildings. When we think of Paris, we think of the Eiffel Tower. Or some buildings, for example, iconic buildings actually remind you of whole countries, although they are in particular cities, like the Taj Mahal, which people think of as India, and many people don't know it's in the city of Agra. But what really defines Washington are its iconic federal buildings and the buildings on the Mall. But Washington's architecture was really borrowed all along. From the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument to the Jefferson Memorial, and on and on. So was it really Washington where this architecture came from, and how did it begin to signify not just Greek and Roman architecture, but Washington? But it did help from the 1800s to 1930 to produce a federal brand, which was then reinforced by these major federal buildings on the Federal Triangle and other parts of the federal city, including across the river at the Pentagon. Meanwhile, many American cities at the same time were developing architecture based on private sector economies and developing their own skylines and really taking advantage of modern technology. Of course, cities that had started building skyscrapers, namely in New York, in Dallas, in Chicago, contemporary to, say, for example, when we were building Union Station, when some of these buildings were being built. We built them, although Union Station is a steel building, it hardly looks like one. Even now, we can see that Washington's iconic buildings are imported. The Miesian Library, the beautiful Dulles Airport. But what is truly Washington is hard to say. And has preservation and postmodernism set us back? That's a question to be asked. We were very happy, of course, when the old post office was preserved, but were we happy when the Federal Triangle was built to copy the other Federal Triangle buildings around it? Or that we had the Willard Hotel and many baby Willard hotels next to it? And have restrictions stymied private sector modern architecture in Washington? We all bemoan the box along K Street, and it still goes on. There's now it's just glacier and thought to be transparent when it's not. But sometimes restrictions can work. In Jerusalem, for example, we are designing a building that's in addition to the deputy chargé's house. And the very first thing we were told that there can only be one material on the building, and that's Jerusalem stone. And here are modern buildings in Jerusalem made out of Jerusalem stone. Here again, restrictions on height and scale, based really on the size of lots in Paris, have worked as well. But why hasn't it worked in Washington? It's worked in Spain. But perhaps we should talk about those questions, but maybe there's another way of restarting or changing course in Washington. And should that be in terms of a completely new vocabulary inserted in the middle of the city like this, or like that? But perhaps we are just afraid of modern architecture. In the Reichstag in Berlin, Foster was allowed to show off what he could do with a dome, but not in the National Portrait Gallery. And then we keep moving backwards. We built the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and then shortly thereafter built the World War II Memorial. So it's, are we just too afraid to take those steps? But as shown previously, there have been very successful modern buildings in Washington, the Metro being one, that can truly be called Washington architecture, and the East Wing, as shown earlier also. Or should we look to Washington's vernacular architecture? There's definitely strong critical mass of good architecture in Georgetown, LaDroit Park, DuPont Circle, and can we then work with the existing architecture that's there? I have to admit, this is one of my own buildings. Maybe there can be a new Washington brand, just like we had in the 30s. At that time, the government was starting up. It was looking towards Greek and Roman architecture to signify empire building. And right now, for example, Paris stands for art and fashion unabashedly, and New York stands for finance and money. Why can't we stand for government? And maybe a new architecture for Washington will come up from really a new government. Maybe if the government of the 21st century can mold itself to what's really important now, which is sustainability, transparency, and technology, perhaps a new architecture would develop. And can Washington become the world stage for such ideas? And can Washington provide a platform for such, and maybe a zone for such ideas, maybe internationally available to? One of the proposals that I've made previously is that we take big swaths of the city that really don't need to, do what they're doing right now, such as Bolling Air Force Base or even National Airport. Don't tell Congress I said that. And maybe the Haynes Point, and convert them in terms of land use into a space where new ideas would come about, and perhaps be a UN on the Potomac of ideas that we would get from all over the world. So what really, though, keeps me here is the great restaurants and the new theaters that are coming up in my neighborhood. Thank you.